Peter, thank you so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You started at the ACLU of New Mexico a little less than 24 years ago. So I'd like to begin by asking, what were the big issues driving the advocacy work of the organization in those first few years for you?
Well, for me, just that first year was just learning how to do the job. And it wasn't all that long after that, of course, September 11th happened. The world changed, our organization changed. I remember we had a new executive director at the national office who is still our executive director, Anthony Romero. And all those folks at the national office were working from their homes, trying to figure out how they maintained the organization and helped us affiliates, our state affiliates, respond to the situation that was unfolding. A lot of the work then was just educating the public about the threats that the USA Patriot Act represented, and then the Homeland Security Act after that, and then the various pieces of legislation around electronic surveillance. So much of the country was so focused on the national scene, and not just, of course, the sort of surveillance questions that were happening in the country itself, but then everything that was happening overseas, and the breaking of the news that there was this torture program in overseas prisons like Abu Ghraib, and so
black sites, CIA black sites.
Exactly. Yeah. And the ACLU was instrumental in airing all the documents that showed that we clearly had this torture program, and that it was endorsed by the highest levels of government, going right up to the president. And so, I can remember a lot of my time then, and we were just a very small organization of 3, maybe 4 people, was getting out into the community and organizing around those issues. We had a number of cities here in New Mexico that passed resolutions formally opposing the USA Patriot Act, precluding those cities from implementing anything similar, any sort of similar surveillance laws. So there's that work that was happening, and then there was work happening in the legislature as well. As always, we were working on the questions around efforts to try to increase sentencing for people going into prison and jail. But what really stands out in my memory is responding to this just sea change in the country as our concepts, our expectations about privacy were just being fundamentally altered by a government that was really trying to seize some authorities that it hadn't had before.
Yeah, the war on terror, thinking back on the ripple effects of that, it's terrifying to this day for me to think about. It seems to me that a lot of people conceptualize or think about civil rights and liberties in the context of the U.S. Constitution. So maybe let's start there a little bit first. How has the landscape changed nationally in the last 25 years?
Well, that's a pretty wide scope of time. I think as time has gone on, we've really seen how changes in the makeup of the federal courts have made the federal judiciary, the federal court system, a much more hostile place for civil rights cases that we typically would bring. And then also sort of in terms of legal doctrine, like the qualified immunity doctrine has made it all that more difficult for civil rights plaintiffs to get their cases heard by a jury or in a bench trial of some sort. So, as time has gone on nationally and we locally have really started to look at, well, how can we begin to find similar ways of vindicating folks' rights in the state court system under the state constitution. And of course, we here in New Mexico are extraordinarily fortunate to now have a provision in state law that allows a New Mexican to go into court, claim that the government has abused their rights under a state constitutional provision, and seek compensatory damage and actually attorney's fees in trying to vindicate their rights that way.
And no qualified immunity under the State Civil Rights Act.
Exactly.
I know that was a big sticking point.
Huge. And when you take a step back and you look at sort of the track record of qualified immunity around the country, I mean, it's just some of the cases just boggle the imagination that seemingly perfectly legitimate questions of abuse that have been brought to the court are tossed out because the particular facts don't match the facts of a previous case. So I would say that's probably been the major change for us, is seeing how the federal courts have become such a difficult place to pursue civil rights claims, either on an individual basis or on a more systemic basis, and now looking to the state courts to try to take over some of that role.
That's a good transition, actually. I've been having conversations, of course, with you and others at the ACLU for a couple of decades now. And one of the things that I've heard with more frequency in the last handful of years is that our state constitution does afford greater protections than its federal sibling, right? How should New Mexicans sort of conceptualize that notion when it comes to their civil rights and liberties?
Well, I think some of that story is still being told. With the passage of the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, we're anticipating that we are going to, and are already starting to see, more and more cases being filed under state constitutional claims, and that law now being written when it has, because we haven't had that provision in state law, it hasn't been used the way it could be and shall be used now. But generally, from the language of it and in the few cases that we've been involved in, the provisions tend to be a little bit more expansive. For example, on religious liberty and religious establishment, that's come into play in some of the cases. A case that was litigated by the ACLU long before I was actually involved with the organization, that struck down the constitutionality of a Bernalillo County seal that had all various kinds of religious symbolism intertwined in it. And I don't remember the details of that opinion, but in my memory, part of what that case hung on was, in fact, the very language of our state constitution. And there are other places in the state constitution where that's true as well, where the drafters of our state constitution saw what was written in the federal constitution and thought something more expansive should apply here in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, I think about some of the early police violence cases that I would have written about years ago, and learning about the Fourth Amendment analog in the state constitution and how it is significantly more expansive than what's in the U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Civil Rights Act, and you're welcome to talk some more about that. I think that was quite a victory for the ACLU. What have been some of the other really big accomplishments at the New Mexico affiliate in the time that you've been there?
Yeah, well, I want to say, first of all, New Mexico Civil Rights Act, we had a pretty significant hand to play in passing that legislation, but we were by no means the only actor in that. We had legislative champions like Brian Egoff, who were right at the forefront of that and took some pretty heavy hits from the media and opponents of the legislation in trying to get that across the finish line. So I want to give them all the credit they do, because they're due, because our part in it was just a part. And that's true of all the wins that we've had over the years. It's always been a coalition effort. It's always been a collective effort with other allies in the community. But I think about, for example, a case that was litigated before I was actually on with the organization, NARAL v. Johnson, a case that was brought against the Johnson administration that established that here in the state of New Mexico, state Medicaid funds will be used to provide abortion care. Cases that, one of the greatest victories I think we had during the time that I've been executive director was the achieving the freedom to marry for same-sex couples in this state. A case that was brought to the state Supreme Court, but was paralleled by an educational effort that EQ&M and other organizations around the state really went to the mat on and helped to shift public opinion, frankly, statewide, that I think set the stage for the court to rule the way it did. And that happened before the U.S. Supreme Court, maybe not a full year, but something less than a year before the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on a similar question. Repeal of the death penalty in 2009 was a huge victory. Again, a big coalition victory. There was a specific coalition to repeal the death penalty that led that effort. More recently, I think some of the real victories we've seen, we talked about the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, but even more recently than that, passing laws that shield people seeking reproductive health care and gender affirming care from malicious efforts to prosecute them from other states than ours. that provide certain kinds of privacy protections. Like those are significant victories. And then you can't forget that we actually had a law on the books not that long ago that would have made abortion a crime once Dobbs was ruled on and Roe was overturned. And again, through a coalition effort, we were able to get that removed from the books. And real credit to the folks in our organization, our reproductive rights lawyers in particular, as well as our other allies in knowing that was possibly a threat, and that we got that taken care of before the Supreme Court ever ruled on Dobbs.
What right now do you think are the 2 or 3 biggest challenges from a civil rights and liberties perspective facing Albuquerque and New Mexico?
I've been very involved in efforts to reform the Albuquerque Police Department. And many folks may know that the Albuquerque Police Department is now sort of sunsetting its consent decree with the Department of Justice. And it is true that they've come into compliance with many of the provisions of that consent decree, and yet for all the training, for all the policy changes, for all the improvements in the way that special tactical units are deployed, we still see a pretty high rate of use of force throughout the community. And so, I think one of the sort of untold questions, one of the untold stories around civil rights for me is like, what does it really take to fully reform policing in this country to such a degree that people don't have to fear that if they're calling the police on behalf of one of their loved ones who's, for example, suffering mental health crisis, that they actually have to worry that they may wind up being shot or the victim of some use of force. We haven't figured that out yet, either in this state, either in this city, or nationally. I just don't think that the right mix, the right constellation of reforms has been discovered yet to transform policing adequately.
I want to ask a question about that. I don't want to ask you necessarily whether you think this 10-year project has worked. I think that's kind of a sucker question, actually. But I want to ask what you think of the tool, the process through which the federal government can come in and conduct one of these big investigations, then go force you in court to make these changes and reforms. What do you think of the tool 10 years into this? Is it aimed properly at what the problem really is?
No, I think, so I have 2 responses to that. I think the first would be, I think because we really don't know what the mix of reforms is, what the mix of transformations in policing are, that's actually going to result in a truly constitutional, truly professional, truly humane policing department, that we can leave that option off the table, that we can leave that tool off the table. That said, it also seems to me from what I've seen that it's critical that we are moving as many of those responsibilities for negotiating, for managing dangerous, criminal encounters out in the public, out of the hands of armed officers and into the hands of other professionals who are better suited to do that work and who aren't going to be armed with a gun and are going to try to solve the issue at the end of a firearm. So I think that, obviously the consent decree did not create the Albuquerque Community Safety Department. That department's had its issues, had its struggles, I understand, but it is headed in the right direction in my view. I think what we need to do fundamentally is reduce the number of encounters on the street between armed officers and the public. I think actually most officers would agree with that. I don't think they want to be in the position of being social workers and substance abuse counselors and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really important part of the mix that the consent decree obviously did not really touch. But on the other hand, you can't deny that it's been an important change in the department to upgrade all of their policies, particularly around the use of force, particularly around the requirements to have some degree of mental health training to better manage, if not perfectly manage, mental health encounters, people in mental health crisis, those kinds of situations. But so much more needs to be done. The trainings have been important from the standpoint that maybe now we have officers that actually will stop and de-escalate situations before they move up on people and make a situation where force is necessary, is unavoidable.
Officer-induced jeopardy, if you will, right?
Exactly.
The police pick a fight, end it with violence, and then call it self-defense.
Yeah, and of course the James Boyd incident was the perfect example of that, where an incident that could have been entirely avoided, where no one had to die or suffer injury, because officers forced that situation to where use of force was inevitable. Someone had to die for it. And we're fortunate that in Albuquerque, I think our officers are better situated to make those kinds of decisions now than many other departments around the country. But it's not the magic solution.
Any other thoughts on big challenges before we talk some about the organization?
I mean, there are big challenges coming up. We can talk more about that because some of them are at a very large level, some of them are at our more community level. I think we as an organization try to be as strategic and use our resources just as efficiently as possible and as focused a way as possible. And it's not been one of our strategic priorities to focus on the question of homelessness and the unhoused community and how they're being treated out in the public domain. It's becoming clear to me that that's something that we're going to have to adopt in the near future, because not only are we seeing more and more efforts by state and local entities trying to essentially enforce those communities out of existence and force them to spaces outside cities and local governments, but that population is going to continue to grow, and the problem is only going to get more volatile as time goes on. So that to me is one of the huge challenges, and it gets us into questions that are far beyond the realm of just civil rights and civil liberties, right? Because now we're talking about affordable housing, now we're talking about mental health services and substance use services. So it's like all of our issues, there are root causes to the things that we oftentimes focus just on the civil rights aspect of. But really, to get at the core issue, you really do need to get to the root causes of those questions.
I have to imagine that this Grants Pass case out of Oregon that the Supreme Court just decided maybe turbocharges the organization's desire to get into that issue.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, going back to the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, we've got the great luxury in this state now of trying to continue to pursue that very case under questions that are identified by our state constitution, by a scope of rights that our state constitution has identified for all of us New Mexicans. And we don't necessarily have to be beholden to a Supreme Court that has such an extremist view of the Eighth Amendment.